Hi, I'm Dai Crisp. I have been farming wine grapes for a very long time, and I have also grown some certified organic hemp. Um, I've been farming wine grapes since 1986, and I'm responsible for about 125 acres of wine grapes currently. And our home farm is where I'm standing. This is the Wren Vineyard. My folks have bought this land in the 70s, and we planted wine grapes starting in 1985. The block behind me here was planted in 1986, and that's what I've been doing with my time. For me, I want to be a good steward of the land. We're here for a certain period of time, and I want to take care of this ground so that the people who follow here have ground that has really been cared for. So there's a kind of a fundamental thing that really is related to stewardship that I think is important. I grow food. I grow wine grapes. We grew this hemp. These are things that people eat or drink and put in their body. And from my perspective, you want to make sure that the things that are being used on the plants and growing the crops are going to be safe. And we've learned in the wine industry that if you use herbicides, there are residues of those herbicides in that product if you spray it. And so I don't want to use materials I don't need to use, and I want to keep things as safe as possible for people. In the world of wine, there is an interesting microbiome that exists. We're standing in front of the vineyard here, and from my perspective, I don't want to use materials that have a negative impact on that, because that microbiome has this enormous impact on the wine itself. So there are just many reasons. Another huge one is that I have a lot of people who are working by hand outside in these places we're farming, and I want to make sure that none of those people are exposed to materials that could be harmful in the future. So we're using all natural materials. I want them to be safe for our workers, and especially the people who, for example, are a tractor driver that has to work with the concentrated materials. In my world, we rely on elemental sulfur as a control for powdery mildew, for example. But there are some very strong materials that are used in farming that are poisonous, and I just don't want to use anything that's toxic in any way that can really hurt somebody. Well, I just think it's an attention to many things. It's, you don't want to use herbicides. You can't. Well, there are some certified organic herbicides now, but I've figured out ways of not using those materials, and so I don't want to use them. Fungicides, you can have problems with fungal pathogens in hemp and with grapes. There are natural materials, and if you use them correctly and use them on time and get good coverage, those things can protect the plant without having to use what we call systemic materials. Systemic materials actually get into the plant. The materials we use are surface. You're actually making an environment that these organisms don't like to live in, basically, is how it works. I want to use natural fertilizer. I think that these hot fertilizers that are commonly used in agriculture, especially water-soluble crystalline fertilizers that are typical. The problem with those materials is that we live in Oregon and it rains a lot here, and those things just go through the ground and wind up in the rivers and the oceans. So I think that if you use more complicated, slow-release forms of nutrition, those things are sequestered and they're taken up by the plant slowly, but they also release slower. And so I use strategies so that we don't use lots of materials that could wind up having an impact on the fish. All of the land that I farm is all salmon safe, and I think it's really important because it's to keep the waterways safe so that salmon that comes upriver and spawns is going to have a safe place to do it. So those are the primary things. It's just looking at farming in a different way and not just reaching for chemicals to solve problems. I started farming wine grapes in '86, but I also, before that, I tried to raise organic onions and arugula, and that was an experience because I had these little arugula doilies because of flea beetles that ate them and stuff. So for a long time, it wasn't that important to have certification or third-party proof. But there are people who claim that they're farming organically that are using herbicide. We farm organically, except we use a little of this Roundup here. Well, to prove it, you have to get a third party to come and look through your records and look at your land and inspect to show that you do what you say. And so that's the reason. From my perspective, I say I do this, but I want people to have the assurance that it's being inspected. And we're certified organic on all the vineyards, all the ground that I farm through the state of Oregon, and that follows the rules of the National Organic Program. I think the big irony of this whole thing is I have to keep records and pay a ton of money to prove that I don't use these chemicals. It seems so backwards. I think the people using the chemicals have to show what it is they use, but that's just not how it is. So we spend money and we spend time. I'm having my organic certifier, I'm seeing him this week actually, and we're going to every one of the sites, looking at the equipment, looking at the materials I use, all of that stuff. And I think it proves it, and it is important. So that's the reason. This land has a high population of the Fenders blue butterfly and the host plant, the Kincaid's lupin. And there's a hill over there that has one of the very highest populations in Benton County. And so that's where the little butterfly comes from. And they're really beautiful. And the Kincaid's lupin is also a very beautiful plant.